Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn research seminar titled New Findings from the Australian Early Development Census, or the AEDC as many of you will know it, Implications for Policy and Practice in New South Wales. I'm Jessica Stewart, I'm the Executive Director of Family and Community Services Insights Analysis and Research, also known as FACSIAR, in the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're joining today's webinar from across New South Wales, we're all living and working on Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I'd like to personally acknowledge the Bidjigal people, who are the owners and First Nations people of the area in which I have the privilege of joining you today. And I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal colleagues joining us today. I'd also like to warmly welcome all of you, our webinar participants. We've had a great response to this one, over 1,000 people registered. I know many of us have been waiting with a lot of anticipation for the AEDC results. It's really fantastic to be hearing those today and thinking about how we can use the results to better inform policy and practice. So today we have Dr. Mary Taiwo, the Australian Early Development Census New South Wales State Coordinator, who works for the New South Wales Department of Education, who will present the brand new AEDC findings for New South Wales and share how they can be used by practitioners and policy staff. We'll hear about how the data is collected, how it can be accessed, and Mary will share key outcomes from the 2024 results for New South Wales, and also present case studies that show the AEDC data and how it's been successfully used in the early years context. So following Mary's presentation, we will have a discussion with Lauren Anderson and Tony Kemba from the New South Wales Department of Education. We'll talk about the broader implications of the AEDC findings and how they're informing changes to key educational policies and programs, including early learning environments and the Brighter Beginnings program. So as always, please put any questions or comments that you have for our speakers in the chat during the presentations, and I can come to those at the end in the Q&A session, and some of those may be responded to during the session. And just to again let everyone know that we'll be recording the seminar and posting it to our FACSIAR webpage. So if you've registered for the webinar, weren't able to attend, you'll receive the link to the recording within about a week. So this time I'd like to introduce our presenters and panel members for this afternoon. Dr. Mary Taiwo is a Senior Population Data Officer with the New South Wales Department of Education, where she performs the role of New South Wales AEDC State Coordinator. Mary has managed the 2021 and 2024 AEDC collection cycles in New South Wales. She is passionate about using evidence to inform effective practices that lead to better outcomes for all children. Mary completed her Masters of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge and her Doctorate of Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, all in the field of inclusive and special needs education. Prior to joining New South Wales Department of Education, Mary worked as a researcher with the University of Edinburgh and Macquarie University, and we're extremely fortunate to have Mary with us today. Tony Kemba is the Director of the Early Learners Unit within the Public Early Childhood Education and Care Directorate in Early Childhood Outcomes. Tony brings to the position strong academic and educational leadership and more than 30 years' experience in a wide variety of educational settings, including roles as a lecturer at UWS, a primary classroom teacher, a P6 school principal where she led the largest public preschool in New South Wales, and as a Director of Educational Leadership in Western Sydney. Tony holds Bachelor of Early Childhood Education and postgrad qualifications in play-based learning and educational leadership, committed to expanding access and improving educational outcomes in the early childhood space. Tony wants to make sure every child is set up for a life of learning. A very warm welcome to you, Tony. And Lauren Anderson is currently Director Early Childhood Development at the New South Wales Department of Education. In this role, Lauren leads the Brighter Beginnings collaboration across the New South Wales Government. This collaboration brings together 8 government agencies, all focused on lifting child health and development outcomes. Prior to this role, Lauren was the Director of Health and Education at the Department of Premiers and Cabinet, supporting delivery of key government priorities in the health and education space, as well as intergovernmental reforms. Lauren has over 15 years' experience working across state and federal government agencies, delivering outcomes, and I know is extremely passionate about really improving outcomes for kids as well. So we are really fortunate to have such expertise in the virtual room. And thank you all again for being here. And please go ahead, Mary.
Thank you so much for having us here today, Jess, and thanks everyone for joining. As Jess has said, I will talk a bit about the AEDC before Tony and Lauren will come and kind of respond to your questions. So we've been introduced already by Jess. I'll just go straight in. So the session today will give you a bit of an overview of what the AEDC is, but also some of the 2024 outcomes, and then a bit of information on how you can access the AEDC data within your community. So the AEDC is a nationwide study that census that happens once in 3 years. The first collection was in 2009, and since then we've had a collection every 3 years, with the most recent completed in 2024. It looks at early childhood development in the 5 key domains you can see on your screen there: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive skills. These are school-based skills, and then communication skills and general knowledge. So the idea of the AEDC is to give us a bit of an outcome of the first few years of a child's life, and by the time they transition into school, we want to have a sense of where they are at and if they are actually fully developed so that they can engage with the learning that they need to engage with while in school. We have links to the domain guides that will be added to the chat, and also the slides will be made available as always, as you've always had. If you want to know more about the domain guides, you can look at the on our AEDC New South Wales webpage, and we have those domain guides that you can look at. So I've said it, the AEDC happens once in 3 years, and it happens across all sectors. So public schools, Catholic schools and independent schools are invited to participate in the AEDC. Kindergarten teachers complete the collection for children after they've transitioned into school. So the data collection occurs in term 2. And this is to allow the teacher to have a bit of time to have observed the child. By term 1, transition is happening. Term 2, the teacher will have had a better sense of the child. Each of the survey, the instrument we call, but it's basically the questionnaire or the survey that the teachers respond to, has about 100 questions where they respond and reflect on each child. So it's pretty comprehensive to understand what's happening for the child and where they're at. As you can see on the screen, over 90,000 children participated across New South Wales. So the children that transitioned into kindergarten in 2024, and over 2,300 schools participated across New South Wales. So it covers a wide range. It gives us a good sense of what's happening. And also to the very coveted kindergarten teachers, we had over 5,000 kindergarten teachers complete the AEDC. Again, it's just to give us a sense that it's a broad perspective and a collection of observation from across the state. Just to give a sense of some of the questions asked in the AEDC, I know I've used the word the instrument, and some people are already like, what do you mean by instrument? So just to give a bit of sense of the questions with each domain, there are a few questions that contribute to each domain, and each domain has sub-domain indicators. So, but then you can see, for example, with physical health and well-being, we're asking, is a child independent in their toileting habit? Does the child arrive to school hungry? So these are just a few of the questions. The instrument is also available on the AEDC national webpage, and the link will come in the chat too. Also some questions around for communication skills and general knowledge. For example, is a child able to tell a story? Emotional maturity, is a child able to help other kids when they are hurt, or do they just disengage? So it's just to give us an all-round indication of where the child's growth is at. The AEDC gives us an idea of the broader context beyond just the child. Again, we're trying to understand what has happened through their experiences in the early years of education. and also a broader understanding of what's happening across the community. I'll talk about the community report later, and it gives us a sense of some of the demographics within the community that impact on what we're seeing in the AEDC data. So it's an opportunity to also examine programs and information or policies that we've implemented in the past few years. So it happens once in 3 years because it's a snapshot. So we just have to have a sense of how are we progressing across the years. People sometimes ask, why don't we have the AEDC every year? But then again, the amount of effort required to complete the AEDC, not just in New South Wales, but across the country, means that we have a better sense of the progress we're making if we space it out a bit over a period of time. One of the big advantages that we have about the AEDC is that it does give us the longitudinal value now. The fact that we've had 6 collection cycles from 2009 means we're able to look at the trends over time. We're able to reflect back on what was happening in 2009, what was happening in 2015, in 2018, and now in 2024, and how that might have impacted our children's development. That's an opportunity for us to know what can we change, what can we improve on, what can we keep doing, because it's actually making an impact and is supporting children's growth and development. Also being aware that there are some factors that positively impact on AEDC outcomes, and we've observed that over time. Access to preschool education, quality preschool education, playgroup attendance, just to mention a few of some of those things that we know have a positive impact. So if a child has engaged with preschool or they've actually engaged with playgroup, it has a positive impact on their AEDC outcomes. However, we also know that there are factors that have negative implications. So the level at which the child is at risk already, especially when it comes to child protection issues, is a big indicator that the child might actually be at risk on at least one of the AEDC outcomes when they transition into school. So just being aware of that as you get to look at the AEDC data. So we have a lot of research that has actually looked, now that we've had we've had 6 collection cycles. We've had some research done by AERO, Australian Educational Research Organization, and the New South Wales Child Development Study Group. And they've looked at, AERO, for example, looked at links between the AEDC and NAPLAN outcomes, and they've seen that vulnerabilities in the AEDC outcomes at the point of transition into school does impact and is reflected in year 3 NAPLAN performance and even up to year 5 NAPLAN performance. So it's actually important to see that it's not just the AEDC is giving us a snapshot of what has happened to the child in the 5 years before they've transitioned into school. That's important information so that we can actually reflect back in the early childhood sector, but it's also a good indicator for schools in terms of supporting children after they've transitioned into school. The New South Wales Early Childhood Development Study did look at some mental health and kind of emotional outcomes, and the AEDC is a good indicator, especially the emotional maturity domain and the social competence domain. It does influence some of the long-term outcomes in terms of mental health and well-being for children. So just being aware that as you look at the AEDC outcomes within at your community level or within a school context, knowing that some of the implications of what you need to consider. So generally, as much as the AEDC is a very comprehensive data collection that looks at children all-round development, it's also important to not look at the AEDC in isolation. I've said it's giving us a broad indication of what's happening across the community or at the state level or nationally. So there are other data sets that we know already exist. We have ABS data. If you work within a local council level, you have that data. Some of the consultation that I've had with stakeholders at the local council that has been helpful to see that different councils actually know what's happening within their council and some of the factors are influencing the outcomes that we see. The difference between one suburb and the other could be just one element of something just happening there that is making a difference or is actually impacting negatively. So just being aware of that. Look at the demographic information that you have within the community. That might be playing a big role in the data that you're seeing. And looking beyond the obvious factors that we can think about, like children having access to more preschool education, or maybe kind of more support for families, looking beyond that, because there might be an underlying factor that we're not aware of, or families not having access to services. So just being aware of that when engaging with the AEDC, bringing in a lot of stakeholders as much as possible is helpful. It's a good way, because some of the knowledge that we need, there are people, for example, early childhood educators that are aware of the community. They engage with families on a daily basis, so they might have a better understanding of the dynamics that is happening. So mainly don't read the AEDC in isolation. So to look at, in terms of the AEDC results, so it's published, the first level is looking at the national level, which gives us a broader picture of what's happening across Australia. But then we do have the state report too that is available, and that link will be put in the chat. That gives you an indication of what's happening in New South Wales at the domain level, but also with different priority groups, what's happening for First Nations children, what's happening for children with language background other than English, children in regional and remote areas, and children who live in major cities. So we have that breakdown at the national and state level available. Those links will be in the chat. But then also we do have the community profile, which is publicly available to everyone. Loosely, the community profile is almost at the local council level. It is at the local council level for the most of it. There are some suburbs that maybe are across 2 local councils, so sometimes they are reported in one and not the other. So just being aware of that. But you can access that once you go on the AEDC national webpage. We have the AEDC Community Data Explorer. That link will also go in the chat. You have a look at it, and I will talk a bit about that. The community profile is probably the best one that gives you more information on what's happening in that immediate community. Schools that participate in the AEDC do receive a school profile. And for public schools, we have also provided that on Scout's dashboard for schools. But then every other school, Catholic and independent schools, they do receive a school profile as a PDF document. So if there are schools that you work closely with, I'll recommend talking to the school principal. The school principal is the one that can approve your access to that school profile. However, the community profile is also available to work to have a greater sense of what's happening. With the community profile is every child that lives within that local council area that is reported at the community level. Within the school profile are the children that are enrolled in that particular school at the time of the data collection. So if you're working with, let's say, for example, a child lives in Parramatta and for some reason they'll go to school in Blacktown, less likely to happen. But if that's the case, once the data collection is completed, the school report will have the school in Blacktown will have the child's report included in their report. However, for the community level, the child's data will be reported back as part of the cohort that lives in Parramatta. So just being aware of that, the community profile probably gives you a better sense of that community. Once you're on the web page, as you see on the screen there, you can have a look and see the community data, type in the name of your community. I've used Parramatta as an example. And then you're going to have it come up. Download the PDF or the Word document. They have the same information there. That gives you a comprehensive context of what's happening. You could look at the table, maps, and the graphs there, but that's a very high-level summary of the data. Downloading the PDF or the Word document gives you a better breakdown. I will talk a bit about that very soon. So now, just to give a big picture, I'll talk a bit about the outcomes in New South Wales broadly. So one of the questions that we have, that we normally ask teachers as part of the data collection is, first of all, does the child have an assessed need in terms of a disability or a learning difficulty that is influencing their ability to engage with learning? And if that's the case, the teachers answer yes to that, and they kind of get to respond what exactly is the diagnosis. And as you can see on the screen, that's the dotted line that we have. And based on the 2024 data, we can see that 6.9% of children had an assessed disability once by the time of transitioning into school. So in a way, it's been on an increase since 2009 when the data was first collected. It did go down a bit in 2018, but we've seen an increase. Now, there are some factors at play here. It could be more awareness, more families actually taking their child to be assessed before they transition into school, so they get the best support that they need, or it could also be that there are more kids coming and transitioning into school that do need that support and adjustment in the process. This is not peculiar to New South Wales. We've also seen similar trends nationally. The other line that you can see on the screen, which is the solid line, as part of the AEDC collection, we do ask the teacher. So if the child does not have a diagnosis for a disability, we do ask the teacher that based on their observation of the child. Remember, I've said they've engaged with the child from term 1 to term 2 when the collection is happening. Do they feel that the child has a need or require further assessment because there might be a learning need that is impacting on their engagement with learning? And that's the solid line that you can see there. In New South Wales, we had 18.4% of children that the teachers were saying that this child needs to be assessed. That's about 1 in 5 children that the teachers are saying probably we need to assess to be sure that they're receiving the right level of support that they need. So that's a high percentage, if we can look. So part of the AEDC, we also report on summary indicators for children. So basically, this gives us a sense of the extent of where the needs are. So the percentage of children who are on track on 5 of the AEDC domains. So they are kind of tracking well. They're on track in each of the domains and all together. So that's OT5, and that's the green line you can see there. So if you look at that pattern, when we started in 2009 with the first data collection, we had 54.8% of children who were on track on all of the 5 AEDC domains. We made a bit of progress up until 2018, fluctuated a bit in 2015. But then since 2021 and in 2024, we've had a bit of decrease, which is statistically significant in the percentage of children who are on track on all the 5 AEDC domains. Looking at the gray line is the percentage of children who are developmentally vulnerable on at least one of the 5 AEDC domains. So that's DV1. This is basically saying the percentage of children who are vulnerable on at least one of the domains. Some of them could be vulnerable on all 5, but at least on the baseline, one of the domains, they are vulnerable. And in that, we had 21.3 in 2009. We did shift it just a little bit over the years, but then by 2024, we're at 21.8, which is also statistically significant for New South Wales. Earlier on, I said we had over 90,000 children that participated in the AEDC data collection. So that's some of the statistics look like a small shift, but it's a significant amount of children. For the purple line, which is the DV2, so we have, this is the percentage of children who are developmentally vulnerable on at least 2 of the AEDC domains. Again, it's just to give us a scale of where exactly, is it just more kids are vulnerable in one domain, or do we have kids vulnerable in 2 or more of the AEDC domains? And in this instance, again, we're kind of a little bit above where we were at in 2009 with 11.2% of children vulnerable on at least 2 of the AEDC domains. So that's about 1 in 10 children are vulnerable in at least 2 of the AEDC domains. So just to give a bit of sense, I know I know a lot of people that will be on this call do work with Aboriginal families, or they work with Aboriginal children. So this is the percentage of children who are on track on 5 of the AEDC domain. That's First Nations children that are on track on all of the 5 AEDC domains. Again, this is an important, will I say, line for us to really reflect and ponder on, considering that this is one of the closing the gap targets of trying to ensure that 55% of Aboriginal children are on track on all of the 5 AEDC domains by 2031. And even though we did have a bit of decline similar to all children in a way, but probably not as much as probably some of the other states might have experienced. And similar, this is developmental vulnerability for 1 or more or 2 or more of the AEDC domains. Again, there was a bit of an increase in this instance, even though some of it was minimal and not as significant as it is for all children, but still we're not making that move as much as we can see. So once there are less children that are on track, then we have a little bit more children who are either developmentally vulnerable on 1 or more of the AEDC domains or 2 or more of the AEDC domains. So just to give you a bit of a breakdown in terms of the domain outcomes, so the summary indicators is to give you like the extent, the high level summary of it. With each of the AEDC domains, and I just have 3 of the domains here. The next slide will have the other 2 domains. We did see a significant shift when it came to social competence in terms of a bit of decline in the percentage of children who are on track, which is the green line you can see across the screen for each of the domains. And also more we had with emotional maturity, we had more decline in New South Wales, which was pretty significant. And for the most of it, the drop in the percentage of children who are on track, actually there are more children that went down to being vulnerable rather than being at risk. So the yellow or the amber line is the percentage of children who are at risk. Again, these are the children that could be supported either way. They could be supported to be on track, or if not supported, then there's that high likelihood that they might actually be vulnerable after a period of time. So for emotional maturity, the decline in on track, we actually seen a more increase in the percentage of children vulnerable. So both with language and cognitive skills, and also with communication skills and general knowledge, we had a bit of decline in terms of the percentage of children who are on track on the 5 on track on the 8 on that in each of those domains, and each of the decline is statistically significant. So we've gone from 84.6 in 2009 for language and cognitive skills, and now it's at 83.1. Similarly, with communication skills and general knowledge, we had a decline from 76.0 in 2021 down to 74.9 in 2004. So in New South Wales, it's only with physical health and well-being that we didn't have a significant decline in the percentage of children who are on track, but the other 4 domains were impacted. So just to give, I wouldn't dwell much on the breakdown for the different priority groups. The slides will be available, but we do have the domain outcomes for our First Nations children. Here, as you can see, language and cognitive skill was probably more impacted here, but it's also similar to what we've seen for all other children. So with each of the AEDC domains, we can see, I did say we have subdomain indicators. So just to give a bit of a breakdown, where exactly are the points where we've seen those shifts within each domain. With physical health and well-being, it's more around physical readiness for the school day, which is the first subdomain indicator there, where we've seen a shift from 10.4% to 11.1%. That's the percentage of children who are vulnerable. Again, to some extent, this is a poverty indicator, and it gives us a sense of where exactly children are being impacted. So questions like, is a child coming to school hungry? Are they properly dressed when they come to school? Those questions fit around the physical readiness for school. With social competence, there wasn't a particular area that had a significant shift in terms of the vulnerability, so it was a bit spread across. But when we look at emotional maturity as and one of the domains that we had a significant shift at the state level, you can see with the second subdomain indicator, which is the anxious and fearful behavior, we had a shift from 10.8% of children who are vulnerable in 2021 up to 11.9%. So that increase in vulnerability in that particular subdomain indicator. Similarly, with hyperactive and inattentive behavior, it shifted from 10.5% to 12.3%. So a significant increase in that particular subdomain indicator. With language and cognitive skills, it was the advanced literacy that actually had the most shift from 6.0 to 8.1% of children who are vulnerable. So again, we know that each of the domains, of 4 of the 5 domains were impacted, but this is just to give a bit of a breakdown to see which of the subdomain indicators were more impacted. There are some questions around transition to schools, 3 main questions that we asked teachers to respond to for the child. And in this instance, the 2 questions that we saw that, again, the shift that we've seen in New South Wales is not just New South Wales, we've seen it nationally, but then some of the 2 questions that we've seen actually that is giving us an indication of the children who are on track or those who are more impacted in kind of not being on track is if the parents or caregivers are actively engaged with school and if they are supporting the child's learning, and also if the child is regularly read to or encouraged to read at home. So those were the 2 kind of transition indicators from what we ask teachers. And so if the teacher is saying that they're not sure or it's not true, if they don't know that the child is read to at home or encouraged to read at home, there is a more likelihood that the child actually might be vulnerable on some of the AEDC domains. Similarly, if the families were not as effectively engaged with the child while they've transitioned into school, then it's more likely that the child will be vulnerable. And some of those slides will be available if you download the slides and look at the detailed breakdown. Generally, we've seen the decline cuts across. Here we have the CFA different CFA categories in terms of the least disadvantaged areas and the most disadvantaged areas. Again, we've seen a decline in the percentage of children who are on track on all of the 5 AEDC domains to different extent, but then consistently we've seen across. And these are some of the questions we're asking ourselves, like what exactly is at play across these, because everyone seems to have been impacted in one way or the other, but we know that the factors impacting them are not the same. So it's best to understand what's the best way to respond. Similarly, in terms of domain outcomes, which of the domains kind of have seen more decline for the most disadvantaged and the least disadvantaged areas. We've seen, if you look at the screen there, the language and cognitive skills had a decline for both. So the trends are a bit kind of consistent in a way, even though we know that there's still a gap and we can still see a gap, but in terms of the decline or the increases we've seen, it's kind of consistent across all categories. For children with language background other than English, similarly, again, is the same narrative where we've seen a decline. Looking at the, well, I said the line, the solid green line is those who kind of speak English only, but the lighter green line is those children with language background other than English. And consistently, even though the gap is there, we've seen both of them have seen a bit of decline, as we have seen in the previous data for everyone. So this is just to give an example of a bit of some of the factors, again, across, since we've noticed the trends are consistent across Australia, there's been some analysis that is happening already at the national level, just to explore what exactly is happening, because we know there's a lot of effort that has gone into early childhood education, a lot of investment, a lot of policies and practices. So we're really trying to understand what's happening. So we can see that preschool, if a child engages with preschool, 1.5 times more likely to be on track. And as I said earlier on, children who were read to at home were less likely to be vulnerable. They were more likely to be on track compared to children who were not read to at home regularly, based on the teacher's observation. Similarly, those whose parents were actively engaged with school are about 5 times likely to be on track compared to those who the teachers felt or observed that the families were not as engaged. So this is just the graph that gives an idea of parental engagement. So if you see there, the gray line is developmental vulnerability on at least one domain. So if the child is read to and the teacher is very comfortable, if there's parental engagement, if the teacher is very confident about the level of parent engagement, then the child is less likely to be vulnerable on any of the AEDC domains. However, if the teacher is not confident, then there's a likelihood that the child will be vulnerable on at least one of the AEDC domains. So earlier on, I talked about the community profile in terms of looking at your community profile. Once you download that PDF document, I'll just give you a sense of the information you see. It gives a breakdown of the number of children in that community, the average age. Every community is different. So I feel like the community level profile is what will help you understand how best to respond. And also gives you the percentage of children born in the country, First Nations children, the percentage of children with English language background other than English, those who are proficient in English and those who are not. So all of that gives you a sense of what's happening, what are the factors that could be at play in that community. So similarly to the state level, the PDF document, which is a community profile, gives you a breakdown of each domain outcome and what the trends are for the community, with the green line being those on track, the amber or the yellow line being those at risk, and the red line are those who are vulnerable. So it also gives a breakdown of the percentage of children who are on track on all the 5 domains, or who are vulnerable on either one or more of the AEDC domains, or those who are vulnerable on two or more of the AEDC domains. So it's worth looking at each community and maybe comparing a few communities that are around each other to understand what's happening, the changes. For most of the local councils I've spoken to, each time we have that conversation, it's always different what's happening in that community and what could be at play. You do have the numbers in the community profile. You do look at the percentages and the numbers. So these are the numbers behind the graphs. It's important to look at it because, for example, 10% of 50 is different from 10% of 500. So just understanding the scale of it within the community is important for each of the domains there. So another important information that is available within the domain, within the community profile, is that at the very end, towards the latter part of the community profile, you will be able to see a bit of a breakdown almost within that council. It gives a breakdown of like within the suburbs, depending on the size of the population within the suburbs, which is what we have here. I've just picked one community randomly. So you can see a bit of a breakdown. So that's also important in going a step further. Maybe you manage a service that is within a particular suburb, and most of the children that engage with that service actually come from that area. You might want to go down to look a step further beyond the community level to understand even the variation within the different suburbs. I've seen, again, with the stakeholder consultation happening, I've seen different suburbs that are probably just across the road from each other, but they are very different. And when you talk to the people in the communities, in some instances, they're like, oh yeah, we know that the people on this side of the road tend to do this more than that. So just understanding what's happening and talking to the key stakeholders within that community does make a difference. You also have the graphs that gives you the ability to compare the community, New South Wales, and also nationally. So just to give you a bit of context, like I said, don't engage with the AEDC in isolation. Look at the broader context and see, is this something that is peculiar to our community, or does this vary with other, in terms of looking at other communities, your community, the state and national level? So we do have a lot of resources. I know there's not enough time to talk through everything. We have a lot of resources, and we have a session that is coming next week with Nathan Wallace, who is coming to come and talk to us a bit on some of those practical steps that we could consider even as you look at your community profile and thinking about what else could we do to support children's development and improve on outcomes. So the link to our professional learning and the session with Nathan will go in the chat before the end of this presentation, and you can always contact us later if you have more questions or you want to dig further into your report. I will pass back to Jess, who will carry on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was incredibly interesting and important research findings. Now, can we turn to our panel members, Tony Kemba and Lauren Anderson? And I'll just start with a few questions for each of you, and then we'll move to the questions in the chat. So just a reminder, please put questions in the chat. I can see there's already quite a few in there and lots of great responses as well. So I'll come to some of those in a minute. But just to start with, Tony, how have schools or early childhood services used the AEDC data in practice?
Thanks, Jess. Acknowledging I'm joining you here from the land of the Barramadigal people on Darug land, paying my respect to the elders of this land and extending that to the elders of the lands where each of you are dialing in from. So let me discuss how schools and early childhood services have used the AEDC data in practice. We have a few services who have used this data at a community level. So they look at the community level data that Mary showed to shape their programs and better support children's development. The examples I can highlight are available through the AEDC Community Grants page and our post-symposium pages. We'll pop those links in the in the chat for you to have a look at your leisure. We have case studies and presentations that discuss these examples in detail. Let me give you a brief overview. Early childhood and care services have engaged allied health professionals such as speech therapists and occupational therapists to come into the service and support the children. This is particularly important in some disadvantaged communities where access to service might be limited or where it's too expensive for families to engage with ongoing support for their child. The actions in these services were based on the increased vulnerabilities reported in the AEDC data and on their observations of the children. So they triangulated between the data and their knowledge. They also engaged with the therapist as part of a playgroup activity to provide that opportunity to increase communication skills across their services. Another example was where an early childhood service found that children in their community were more vulnerable in the physical health and wellbeing domain in comparison to the state average. So they compared their data to the state. They could see that this aligned with feedback they were receiving from kindergarten teachers from their local public schools. They saw that the children were entering school struggling to not only do gross motor and fine motor, but that endurance side of things. They were fading with energy levels and stamina. So the service discussed this with families and found that there was a lack of opportunity to engage in physical space. So as a response, they made a strategic change by incorporating more daily outdoor play and structured physical activities into their program, ensuring that children had ample opportunity to develop strength, coordination, and self-care skills. A byproduct of this opportunity was the engagement with their local schools and the opportunity to improve the transition process from early learning services into school, which gave better outcomes for children. Another example was a preschool that showed data that showed that their students, or their children, were performing below national percentage in communication and physical development. They looked at their community data and saw this was a need. As a response, the service developed a visiting borrowing program with their local library, and they established a walking bus. So they walked from the service to their local library. When they attended the local library, they spent time with the librarian, listening to stories, borrowing books, and engaging in the library process. The librarian also came to visit at the preschool. They facilitated sessions with the children as well as running parent information sessions. They also used the data in their grants process to make improvements in their physical area. So they were able to access grants to improve their physical environment by using their AEDC data. This gave them a chance to not only develop in the communication domain, but also in the physical domain. As an addition, they also collaborated with local speech therapists and OTs to strengthen their knowledge and understanding in this space. This is a big opportunity for this service. The data helped them to make decisions they were looking at from a grants perspective, but also to engage further the community and grow children's love and interest in literature. So preschools are addressing the gaps in provision and opportunity and seeing a chance to look at the data to guide their programs. These examples also highlight how AEDC data can validate educator observations. They're seeing something, they're really aware of it, they're finding the data to validate it, then using that validation to support them in accessing further resources and inform them in targeted intervention, and to foster that triangulation of collaboration with schools, specialists, community teams, and themselves. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks so much, Tony. That's fantastic. And now to Lauren. So how does the Department of Education use AEDC results to shape its policy and programs? And particularly, can you talk a bit about the program that you're responsible for, Brighter Beginnings, and how it responds to AEDC results and some of the things you're doing in Brighter Beginnings that address some of the declines in the results that we've seen today?
No worries, Jess. As you know full well, I have no issues ever talking about Brighter Beginnings, and you're about to find out that I also have no issues talking about the AEDC results either. From a department perspective, and especially for the early childhood outcomes group, obviously, as for everyone on this webinar has just heard, the evidence is incredible that is in there. Obviously, like any data collection, it is not perfect, and some of you in the chat have pointed out some of those things that you might need to look a bit closer at. But Jess, as you and your team already know, we don't have that much data, firstly, in the early childhood space, that 0 to 5 space, which is where Brighter Beginnings works. We also don't have that much data that's population level. And even just for me personally, like I've seen versions of Mary's presentation for 2024 a couple of times now, and each time there's still stuff that I pick up, and it just pulls me up back into that universal space. What are we seeing across the board? Because so much of our work we do in the department is targeted or specific to specific needs, etc. Just one sec, everyone. I have a 4-year-old who's bugging me right now. You can go do that. That's fine. The phone stopped working, as it does as you get to the end of the session. So it's an important sort of data point for us and evidence base in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We also have to look at other data sources as well. And Jess, as you know, to go on to Brighter Beginnings, we've been looking at what are the different child development indicators that each of the agencies have at the moment that they can use, that we can use, and that just helps us triangulate things a bit as well. Sense check some of those things that we know might not be right with the AEDC results. Obviously, one of the things that we're constantly looking at with the AEDC is whether it's culturally responsive. Yes, we have a lot lower number for our Aboriginal children, but what does that actually mean in practice? Is that right? Is it the nature of the tool that is used, etc.? So like with all data sources, we take it with a grain of salt. For Brighter Beginnings, how are we using it? What's really interesting for us is we are focused on child development. So the collaboration is 8 government agencies, but in particular in sort of the delivery arm of it, we have ourselves, DOE, we have New South Wales Health, we have Communities and Justice, and also the Department of Customer Service as well. And looking at this data from each of those agencies and seeing what each of us pick up, because each of us care a little bit more about each of the different domains, and then bringing that together. We had a session like this for all of the teams that work on Brighter Beginnings across government a couple of weeks ago. And we had everyone from our EDs who lead the collaboration right down to our program delivery teams. And it was so interesting. I was actually in the room with our health colleagues for that session and hearing what different people pulled out in terms of what they were looking at. For example, rural and remote is a big issue in health at the moment, and service delivery to our rural remote areas. And when you dig into the data, you'll see that socioeconomic actually has a bigger impact on determining child development vulnerabilities and whether you're on track or not than rural and remote, that one kind of jumps all over the place a bit. And so health, we're jumping on that really quickly. And for me, in Brighter Beginnings, that's some of the pearls of wisdom in that work, is when you get that different agency perspective, and then you bring that all together, and you can often come up with some really good ideas in terms of what you're doing. For us, we came in Brighter Beginnings in 2023 is when we got funding, and so on the back of the 2021 results. So by the time we got our stuff up and running, we didn't really have much time in the field before these 2024 results came out. But now, obviously, we're able to take some of the results of our program, such as we run a program that one of my teams co-leads with New South Wales Health, called Health and Development Checks for 4-year-olds in ECE services. And that's about our local health districts going into ECE services and delivering that 4-year-old check from the Blue Book, or My Personal Health Record, the Baby Book, as some of you may know it as, to 4-year-olds in services. And so this year, this is the first time where we've had sort of 30% of 4-year-olds we've got to in the last financial year, being able to look at that data alongside the AEDC data and see that they're coming up the same. So we've got the biggest referral we get for that program is speech and language, and you'll see what we've seen in this program with AEDC as well. Speech language communication has had a dip in the last census, and then looking at that thinking about that domain and thinking about how critical that is for kids to be able to thrive when they get to school. That's a really key one, that they can communicate their needs, communicate with their friends, at social relationships, etc. So we're doing a whole lot of work at the moment focusing in on that and how we can get some uplift in that space.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to turn to the questions in the chat. There's some broad questions and then some more specific questions. So I might start with some of the broader ones, and if we have time for the others, I'll come to them. So one of them is around what the response is and how you're incorporating the results of this in the foundational supports, thriving kids reforms that are happening at the moment.
I can jump in on that one if you want, Jess.
Thank you.
Alongside lots of other data, obviously the NDIS data, etc. I know I'm not directly involved in that work at the moment, but I know the AEDC is being considered as part of that. Obviously, we don't have exact data in terms of different cohorts that foundational supports or thriving kids may consider in terms of that work. But as I sort of started my other answer, in government, especially in social policy, we never have perfect data on everything. So especially in that important work, which is all about sort of getting kids the supports they need when they need it and early, they're using this as part of that and many other data sources to really understand what the need is and how you'd address that.
Thanks, Lauren. So there's another question here. Given the results for language background other than English, are there any system-wide changes being recommended to level the playing field for these families?
Jess, do you want to answer that from DCJ?
I don't know, Tony, is that perhaps something that you have experience with?
My experience sits in the school space and the early learning services that lead into schools, so preschool predominantly. The work in this area, I suppose, aligns quite nicely with the shifts in the early years learning framework to enable us to have principles that identify looking at place and looking at children's, not just our history and culture of our country, but history and culture of the children who are in the service. So that does support developing strengths, stronger senses of belonging, and also that strength of being able to translate for our families so they can feel connected. The work in this area is always growing in the sense of understanding what influences are going to provide for best opportunity for children outcomes. We always stem back to supporting parents in understanding the value of learning first language first and the influence that can have on developing second language. So I suppose that the best practices that we have in place are around parental supports and ensuring parents have confidence in using their first language and ensuring children learn that first language prior to expecting children to engage with English to the full strength, because the first language is the foundation that enables them to then grow their English language understandings. Our work with the department's refugee supports groups enable us to strengthen parent access to things as well, particularly to resources like allied health.
Thanks, Tony. And Mary, just given your research background, is there any comment you have around that?
I think there is quite some work that has been done by organizations like Multicultural New South Wales or Settlement Services just to understand some of the AEDC outcomes for children with language background other than English. But I do know that some of the stakeholders that I have in line to present some of these outcomes to in the coming weeks includes like the early childhood outcomes, multicultural team, and other teams within the department. So hopefully, as we go on further, they might have a response, but not at this stage.
Thank you. It's still early days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Mary, this might be another one for you. So there's a comment here. The developmental vulnerability showed a fairly consistent trend between 2018 and 2024. What might then account for the increase in teachers reporting needs requiring further assessment in this period?
I do think there's a combination of factors. One is probably there's actually more awareness for teachers in the sense that if a child is expressing or responding in a particular way that is impacting on their ability to engage with learning, probably in the past few years, teachers are more aware that it might be there is more to it, and we probably need to investigate further, unlike what teachers would have previously done, maybe 10, 15 years ago in a way. So understanding that actually it might not just be that the child, for example, is just being naughty, but there might actually be some behavioral issues that need specific targeted support in a way, just as an example. But then it might also be the factor we're still, again, early days, we're still having a look. Is it that we're actually having more children coming through that do need more support or they do need more early intervention? And I think some of the work that Lauren's team is doing around the health and development checks might actually help us to see if that's something that, okay, is it consistent that we're seeing those needs early on, but there's no early intervention support before the child transitions into school? So I think it's a combination of those factors. And with some of the committees I've spoken to, there are some committees I feel like some families hold back from having their child assessed in the early years because they're a bit worried about the child being labeled when they're transitioning into school, or they're worried about like the family is going through a visa application and they don't want their child to be assessed as having any need that might impact on the whole family's visa status, and all those factors that play with different communities. So I think it's a combination of factors, looking at your community profile for the person asking the question and thinking what might be happening and what might be influencing the children in that group, depending on the percentage in your community, might help you understand it.
Terrific, thank you. There's another question in there about when it was first developed, it was recommended not to compare, I think it was community to community or suburb to suburb. Are you able to comment on that now?
Yeah, so I think basically, you don't want to compare and say, if, let's say, for example, if these are the outcomes in Parramatta, therefore Blacktown must have this particular outcome because we implemented the same initiative. I think it's from that lens, not comparing. However, I think there is a meaningful comparison that can be held in terms of, if you're having similar initiatives, or why did this community see an increase? Why did other communities see a decrease? Is it access to services? What are the factors that enable us or not enable us? So in terms of comparing, I think it's a yes and no response. You don't want to look at the community in isolation, but then you also want to understand what are the enabling factors that maybe is enabling the community to do well, and is that something we can bring into our community, or what are the factors that might be impacting our community that other communities. So I would say like a healthy comparison, but not like a direct, and contextual too, not direct comparison. I was speaking to a local council today, and we're trying to compare two suburbs within the local council, and one of them, on one part, they had a high emotional maturity. They had an improvement in terms of children's emotional maturity, but the next suburb that was apparently right next to it, they had a big decline in emotional maturity. And we're like, what could be happening? And actually the early childhood educators there were like, okay, across the street, there are more working families. So even on Saturday, some of the kids are taken to childcare in that sense. So they had a decline in emotional maturity in some way. But the other group, there are more grandparents, more families, more like intergenerational families. So then emotional maturity seemed to be thriving in that community. So just understanding that was the difference and what's impacting. So a healthy comparison is okay to understand how to respond.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And just related to that, there's a question around when you're looking at the correlation between AEDC and CEFA. Is a CEFA determined by the location of the school or where the child resides?
Where the child resides.
Right. Okay.
I can see Jess, though, didn't quite answer the LeBoat question from the right angle. I don't know whether Mary wanted to address it. Marie's pointed out that it was more about the discrimination and disadvantage. Mary, did you want to look at the supports in that space?
In terms of the what is causing the gap for them, we don't know fully. Again, it's something that we have to explore a bit more, that if at all there is a disadvantage that is actually playing right from those early years. I wouldn't discount that totally, but at this stage, we haven't really explored what exactly is making the difference. And probably some of that work that has been done by Multicultural New South Wales, and that we'll probably need to look a bit more into it and understand what the issues are.
Thank you. There was also a few comments in there around the relationship between the AEDC results and children who are either in out-of-home care, experiencing domestic and family violence, child protection. That's definitely research that collaboratively across our departments we do, and particularly working with our academic partners as well. There is absolutely a relationship between some of those child maltreatment risks and vulnerability on the AEDC, and we will be sure to be doing some of that further analysis, updating it with these latest results. But we can put some of the existing research reports into the meeting chat and then also on our FACSIA webpage. And we are coming to the end of the session. It feels like it went very quickly. Just before we wrap up, can I ask each of you to say if you had one take-home message for our fantastic audience, what would it be? And I will start with you, Tony.
Thanks, Jess. I think I'd like to echo what Mary said before. We can't look at one example and apply it to each of the suburbs. We have to actually look at them individually, but also learn from the other things that are occurring. One of the greatest things we've seen is the learning from other grants and other practices across our services to get ideas for how to have an influence on the outcomes for children. And that gives us a greater chance, I suppose, to look at the ideas board with that concept of how do I contextualise it to my community and the needs of my children.
Thank you. Lauren?
I'll bring a brighter beginnings lens to it. I think for us, in terms of Jess, as you know, and looking at this, it's really about looking at what's coming through in terms of the data and what do we know about what kids need supports and how are they getting them. Like I've seen the comment in the chat from, we were talking about how the difficulty of getting like paediatric speech therapists out to some of our rural and remote areas. absolutely, we know that. Same with OTs, same with child psychologists, etc. And I think that's it, as we've discussed, Jess, in our meetings, that's a key focus for us at the moment, is looking at these results and going, how do we get supports out to the kids that need it, when they need it, so we can start to make sure that everyone's turning up to school ready to learn and ready to thrive.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And we'll finish with you, Mary.
I will say, talk to the stakeholders in your community. Like, I think some of the underlying factors that we're not seeing in this data, it lies within the different stakeholders and understanding what's happening for the families, the educators in the services, and yeah, like the different rooms that I've sat in talking to stakeholders, the explanation is always different, and it makes sense when you did say it. And I'm like, oh, I never would have thought about that. So talk to the people within your community and look beyond the obvious in those conversations.
It's fantastic advice. Thank you so much. And just to remind people, there are a bunch of resources further up in the chat if you're interested, and we'll post all of them on our website. So thank you all so much for joining us today. If you did register for today, you'll receive the link to the recording in the next week or so, again with additional materials and links on the Lunch and Learn website. You can see lots of hearts and claps for our fantastic presenters today. And we would also like to invite you to our next Lunch and Learn, which is on the 23rd of September, which is titled Strengthening Relationships and Connections for Young People in Therapeutic Residential Care. So we really hope to see you there. For now, thank you and have a wonderful day.